And take a look at the topics for this chapter. We have numerals, genitive of the whole, ablative with numerals, and ablative of time. This topic in general is not too difficult, and it will allow us once again to solidify and improve our mastery of Latin noun declensions in particular. Insofar as Latin, as you know, is an inflected language, knowing the endings is crucial for learning and understanding Latin. Let's take a look at this chapter in greater detail. As always, you will want to read through this chapter probably once, and as I've said before, pay particular attention to the examples. Please do the self-tutorial exercises in the back of the book for which you have the answers before you tackle the Sententia Antiquae, which is the focus of these video tutorials. As you'll see, numerals is fairly straightforward, and it often declines according to our Latin noun declension chart. And because we're reading Latin from Latin into English and not English into Latin, really just being able to recognize what declension and case these numbers are in will help you be successful for this topic, as you'll see. The genitive of the whole is just another species of the genitive. The genitive most often is translated with of. So, for example, a part of life, pars vitae. Vitae, AE, is going to be in the genitive, and so it's just a unique way of discussing another aspect of the genitive, which you can see is explained and given examples for right here. And then we have a couple topics dealing with the ablative. Ablative can be the trickiest case, but if we have a preposition that is followed by the ablative, in this case X is always followed by the ablative, we see amicis meis, which is second declension ablative plural. There's our is, so amicis eis. So as I said just a few moments ago, really what this chapter boils down to is further mastery of our declensions. You will want to take note of the vocabulary as well, since this is new vocabulary for us, and it's the vocabulary used in the chapter, especially the exercises. All right, let's jump right into it and give it a go here. Dio iniste navi fuit propter tempestatum nubisque semper mortem expectebam, by Terence, who was a comedian. Again, it sounds somewhat grave, as you'll see, but I don't know the original context, but maybe it was a little bit more lighthearted. People seemingly were dying, but perhaps there's a comedic aspect, but again, I'm not sure without researching the original context. All right, so let's work our way through the vocabulary. Again, if you don't know the vocabulary, there is a dictionary in the back of the book. You can also use Whitaker's Words or a regular college level Latin English dictionary. But once you do that, you're going to have something like this. For a while, this is where we get the word duration from Latin and French. For a while in that ship I was, and because or on account of the storm and clouds, always death I was expecting. So let me go ahead and give this a more idiomatic translation, and then I'll walk you through the vocabulary and the endings. So I'm going to start with this time expression. As you'll see, Dio could mean a couple of possibilities. You just have to decide which one. It can mean for a while, for a long time, for a considerable time, and just choose one that you think fits the context the best. So I'm going to say for a long time. Let me make this a little bit larger. For a long time. Sounds like an opening line to a song by the rock group Boston. But then in English, we would expect probably the verb next. Now, fui is in irregular form, and so much of learning a language is just knowing the vocabulary. So we have to look these things up. So if I go to Whitaker's Words, you're going to see this is the perfect form of the verb sum, which you had in chapter 1. And so sum means I am, esse means to be, fui means I was. So we're going to put this in the past perfect tense. And so for a while, I was. And I'll just put that in there as a marker since that's new for us. Remember, Latin uses isti, imus, isis, erunt as the present perfect endings, but then we have to add it to our stem. So fui means I was, fuisti means you were, fuit means he or she or it was, and so forth. Going back to our example, but then in iste nave, iste means that, but then we have a couple ablative endings. So iste, that's first declension, ablative singular. Nave is third declension, ablative singular. Again, I really recommend having these next to you so you can see iste nave, there's the A, and there's the E right there. So we go back here. For a long time, I was in, or I guess probably say on that ship. Prepositions in every language are a little bit different, so we're not inside of the ship, but rather on top of it, presumably, on the deck or whatnot. So for a long time, I was on that ship, and on account of or because. So here's another preposition followed by accusative. So tempestatum and nubes are both in the accusative singular. Actually, this one's in the plural, excuse me. So this is third declension, accusative singular, em. But then we have the nubes referring to clouds, also third declension, accusative plural. So for a long time, I was on that ship, and because of, that's the propter, because of the storm, the tempestatum, and the clouds. So que means and. I was always expecting death. So I was expecting. That is our imperfect bombe spot, vamos pate spot, which you had in an earlier chapter. And of course, this is where we get the word expecting. And then mortem is our direct object. So that is once also third declension, accusative singular. Em, so that's the object that is being expected in this case. There's the em right there. We put all together, and I was always semper expecting death. So let's take a look at it one more time. For a long time, I was on that ship, and because of the storm and the clouds, I was always expecting death. All right. Let's move on to the next one here. I keep my translation somewhat literal so I can explain the grammar. I'm not too worried about that note right there by Google Grammar. All right, moving on to number 2. Septem horis ad eam urbam venimus. What's important in this one is taking your time and looking up the verb so you get the right tense. It's hard to distinguish between the present and past tense form of this verb without recognizing the macron or the context. So this is actually past tense, and the only reason we know that is because of the macron. And so you have to put it in the past tense, otherwise you'd have the incorrect tense. Septem, of course, is 7. Originally, as you know, the Romans only had 10 months, later added July and August because of Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus. So septem hores means in 7 hours. So here's our time expression, which is one of the topics in this chapter. And we came to that city within 7 hours. So let me write this out and then I will walk you through this one. So we came to that city within 7 hours. You definitely want to write out 7, standard English, to write out 1 through 12 and only use cardinal numbers after 12. So let's go back and take a look at this one. Septem horis. So here is an ablative of plural. So horis, where we get the word hour. So that's why it ends in is. But 7 is a cardinal number, as your book explains, so we don't put a noun declension ending on that one. And 2, ad means 2, eam means that, urbem means city. So notice that eam and urbem are both in the accusative. So eam, urbem, so there's am, em. And then our verb in the past tense is venimos. You could also translate this as we arrived. Again, I'm not going to do this for all of these words. This is something you need to do on your own to learn these verbs. But you can see venio can mean a number of things. Can mean to come. But also arrived also works in this context. All right. So we came to that city within 7 hours. Again, if you want to say within 7 hours, we came to that city. That's just a stylistic choice. You can decide which style works best for you. Moving on here. Italia illis temporibus erat pleno, Graecarum artium et multi Romani ipsi haes artis collibant. So here is a line from Cicero. This one is a little bit longer, so again, you'll have to break it apart and make sure you look up the words and try to put the pieces together, if you will. It's always the challenge in Latin. It feels like you're putting together a puzzle. There's probably no way to overcome that without just many, many years of study. Italia, so Italy, during those times, so here we have a time expression in the ablative, and you'll have to look at the notes in the chapter as to the different ways you could translate it. But illis ibus, you can see here is our ablative time expression, so following the grammar topic in this chapter. But this one, because we're missing the preposition that we need in English, you may have to try different combinations of prepositions to see which one fits both the context and the style of the original Latin. So Italy during those times or at those times, you can decide which one works best for you. Was, so here's our eram res erat, so here's the imperfect form of to be, which you had earlier in the book, was full of Greek arts. So let me go ahead and write this out here. Italy at those times was full of Greek art. So let's take a look at this. So Italy at those times was full of Greek, I guess Greek arts. So let me go ahead and change that here. So here we have the genitive of the whole, which is one of the grammar topics in this chapter, really just the genitive, but you can see aurum is first declension, genitive plural, and eum is an I stem noun, third declension, genitive plural. So if we go right here, you can see aurum, but then the so using the genitive plural. And then we just need to know the root of the vocab to come up with this translation or reading. Italy at those times was full of Greek arts, and many Romans themselves were worshiping these arts. And many Romans themselves were worshiping these arts. This one might be a little bit trickier than I gave the impression of, but again, if you go through the sentence carefully and look up the words, it'll be a little bit easier, but but this one I know that in the past has caused students some troubles just because it's a little bit longer. It might take a little bit longer. The key is to chunk it, or get a sense of the vocab and the verbs in particular. And then here we have a new clause. So let's make sure we know this before we continue. And then kind of looking at this last clause, multi Romani, that is second declension, nominative, plural, so that's the subject. And then these arts, hes artis, H-A-S-E-S for artes. So if we go back here, hes artes, and then here's our third person plural imperfect, collebant, which they give you right here. Actually, I'm going to change the translation. It could mean worship, but I guess we're cultivating is what they're going to have right here. So let's go ahead and put that. Remember, if it's in italics, that would be a possible translation. These are the words in English that are derived from it, but let me be consistent with what we've done earlier. We're cultivating these arts. All right. Moving on to quatuor, inter bellum et pacem dubitabant. So here's Tacitus, a Roman historian. Dubitare means to hesitate. It's where we get the words doubtful and dubious. So it's nunt, nt, so it's they. They were hesitating between war and peace. So let me write that down and then we'll explain it. So they were hesitating, and again, just dubitabant, so that's the dubitabant. Dubitabant. Yeah. So I put that in there just to kind of review how Latin forms verbs. So the NT means they, but then the BA means were plus ing, because it's the past continuous, progressive, or imperfect in Latin. But then we need what's the action or verb that they're doing. That's what's the hesitating. So this is one of the hard parts of Latin, or one of the big differences between English and Latin. You can see English has 3 words, Latin just has 1, and that is often the case in Latin. Latin really will test your English just as much as it helps you learn a foreign language. But then after we get that, it's pretty straightforward. Inter means between, like intermission of a game. But inter is always followed by the accusative. So sure enough, bellum is second declension neuter noun, and peace is pax, P-A-X, which is third declension. So if we look at our declensions again, bellum, pacem, so um, em, because inter requires the accusative case. Again, if we don't know that, we could look it up in a dictionary, but here you can see it says it's a preposition in the accusative, so you have to put it in the accusative. Okay. All right, moving on here. Here we have a time expression. I think this is even one of the examples they give in the book before these exercises. Eo tempore means at that time. I was throwing him out of the city. So let me go ahead and write this down and then I will explain it. Oops, let me finish this one. At that time, I was throwing him out from the city or of the city. I almost put of, but I want to keep it literal. If we think like exit from here, of might be a little bit better English, but let me try to explain why I chose from so you can understand the Latin better. So it begins with a time expression. Time expressions, in my experience, just need to be memorized. But it is in the ablative. Why? Because second declension ablative singular is O. Third declension ablative singular is E. So there is our O, there is our E. But again, I recommend just memorizing that, making a flashcard at that time. But then bomb means that, remember, there was no J in classical Latin. This is where we get the word eject. So I was ejecting him, probably a reference to Catiline and his conspiracy against the Roman Republic. But then from the city, X is always followed by the ablative, third declension, ablative singular is E. So at that time, I was throwing him out of the city, which you read about earlier in an earlier chapter. All right, so hopefully you agree this chapter doesn't really present anything all that new, and it gives you another opportunity. This is the key, really, I believe, to being successful in Latin, beyond, majoring in Latin or something like that. Just learning these Latin noun declensions can take you a long ways toward success in your Latin coursework. Number 6 here, Dicipat quisque misa quibus Romanos sum. This one is a little bit tricky when you first look at it, because it means he was saying each person miserable. So each miserable person was saying, I am a Roman citizen. Let me write that down here. Each miserable person was saying, I am a Roman citizen. What does that even mean? Well, back then, Rome, just like many people, migrate to other countries for a better life for themselves and their family back in the ancient world. According to Cicero, if you were miserable, maybe you dreamed about becoming a Roman citizen, maybe you were in a state of bondage or servitude, and so you wished for your freedom at some point, which was also one of the differences between the Greeks and the Romans. In the Greek world, if you were born into bondage, you never did achieve your freedom. In the Roman world, it was possible to achieve your freedom at some point. One of the big differences between the Romans and the Greeks. So quisque means each person or everyone. And then this is where we get the word miserable. It's just an adjective. And then was saying, I am sum, a Roman, Romanos, citizen, Kivos. Number 7 is a reference to Catullus and his love poetry. Mea puella passaram suam amibat, et passa ad eam solam semper pipiebat, nixe ex gremio movibat. This one again a little bit longer, so let's break it apart. They also give us some vocabulary. So, my girl was loving her sparrow. So, and there was a reference to Catullus himself. So let me write that down. We've had this earlier. So my girl, again, the girl probably is a reference to Lesbia, who was a code name for a Roman aristocratic woman. So my girl was loving her sparrow. And again, her sparrow is a reference to Catullus. So my girl, Mea Puella, was loving her sparrow. And the sparrow, and here's our verb, was chirping was always chirping, so semper means always, was always chirping to her alone. My girl was loving her sparrow, and her sparrow was always chirping to her alone. In other words, writing poems and poetry to her and her alone. Nor was he being moved from her lap. Let me write that down and we'll try to elucidate that. Nor was he being moved from her lap. So nec nor was he being moved, or nor was he moving himself, might be a little bit better here. Nor was he, because it's not in the passive, so let me change that. Nor was he moving himself from her lap. So they're at a dinner party, presumably, and they're passing notes to each other, talking to each other, hopefully without trying to draw attention to themselves, is presumably the context here. Nor was he moving himself ex gremio. You can see that means lap. From her lap is the context here. Latin, as you know, tended not to use possessive adjectives, his, her, and so forth. So we have to add that in our English translation. All right, moving along here. Again, if we're going too fast, just stop the video and back it up and watch it again. And as always, feel free to come by one of my German classes if you would like further elucidation about any of these. Okay, moving on to number 8. Filiae mei fratrum meum diligabant me vitebant me patrum acerbum appellebant et meam mortem expectebant nunc autem mores meos mutavi et duos filios ad me cres traham. All right, so this is a longer one. So we got to look up the words, and we're going to take it clause by clause using punctuation as moments to stop and make sure we know what's going on before we continue. So presumably you're going to have to spend some time looking up the vocab on this using Whitaker's Words or Dictionary. Once you have that, you're going to have sons, my brother, or excuse me, sons, my brother, my, were liking, me, avoiding, me, father, mean, they were calling, and my death, they were expecting. Now, but, ways, my, I have changed, and two sons, to me, tomorrow, I am bringing. So, what's the context of here? Well, I mean, parenting is not easy. Most children are not self-starters. Most children, we're all young ones, right? Don't know what to do without some guidance, and you can sort of see right here the father was a little bit strict, perhaps. But again, this, remember, Terence was a comedian, so perhaps it was funnier in context. Maybe it doesn't sound so austere as I'm suggesting. At any rate, what do we do when we don't like somebody? We project and we imagine somebody else. In this case, apparently their father's brother, their uncle. They projected their own dislike of their father towards loving of their uncle as a way to kill symbolically. Here we're following Freud, Oedipus complex, to kill the father and to take revenge on the father by telling him that they don't love him. Because what's the opposite of love? Of course, hate and violence. But as they got a little bit older, they all changed, mutavi, and now they, with a little bit of experience and understanding, they understand each other better. All right, so let's go ahead and write down the Latin here. So filii mei, that's my sons. And then we're loving or we're liking, that's the diligabant, excuse me. And then my brother, like fraternity, that's fratrum meum, they were avoiding me. So vitebant me, vitebant means avoiding. They were, so we got a lot of imperfect here because bam, be, spot, bamos, bate, spons. They were calling, appellebant, like an appellate court. They were calling me literally an acerbic father. I'll keep it literal just so you can follow Latin. An acerbic or mean father. And so that's the patrum acerbum. And we're expecting, almost hoping, my death. And so that's the mea mortem. Now, however, so that's nunc autem, I have changed my ways, my mores, and I am expecting 2 sons to come to me tomorrow. All right, let's talk about this one in a little bit greater detail. Again, you may have slightly different style or even a couple words here and there, but this is generally the sense of it. So my sons, filii mei, were liking or were loving my brother. Again, this is where we get words like diligence or delight. We're liking my brother. Notice that my brother is in the accusative. So fratrum, like other family members, is third declension. So third declension, accusative. Singular is em, so fratrem. But then meum is second declension because we use possessive adjectives with first or second declension. We're using the masculine because brother's masculine. So meum fratrem. If it were my sister, it would be meam sororem, like sorority, because in that case we'd be referring to a feminine object, but here we're referring to a masculine object. They were avoiding me, vetibant me. They were calling me, again, acerbem. Let's see, I kept it literal, but if we look this up here, a harsh, yeah, maybe harsh sounds better. Let me change that. Calling me a harsh father. So acerbum patrem. So we can see that both harsh and father are in the accusative because they are calling him that. And they were expecting, almost literally waiting for my death, meam mortem, also in the accusative. So here's first declension, accusative singular, am, third declension, accusative singular, em. So again, hopefully you have your declension chart out. But now, however, I have changed my ways, so literally my mores. And let's see, trahem could mean a number of things. Let's see if we have a slightly better option. I will get, well, I guess none of these really work all that great. So it just use context clues. The point being is that they're going to come visit. They're going to go to him tomorrow. Ad me cres, because cres, like procrastination, means tomorrow. All right, so that one is, and then notice that duos filios is second declension, accusative plural, because the 2 sons is what he is, who he is expecting. All right, so that one's a long sentence, but if you break it apart and look up the words, I think you can understand one possible translation. Number 9, Dionysius Tyrannos, quoniam tensore caput comitere timebant, filiae suis barbam et capulum tandre docuit, iteque virgenis tondebant barbam et capulum patris. Now they do give us quite a bit of help on this one, but we may have to, once again, look up a lot of words. And here it's the tyrant Dionysus. So you're going to have something like this if you look up the words. You're going to have Dionysus, tyrant, sense, barber, head, give, was feeling, or excuse me, was fearing, daughters, his, beard, and hair, to shave, taught, and therefore girls were shaving beard and hair of father. So the context of this is the tyrant. If you're a tyrant, you're probably, or not probably, but a tyrant perhaps is paranoid that people are out to get him. And so he was afraid to have other people use a razor to cut his beard and hair. And so he taught his daughters how to do those things, so they wouldn't, I don't think, slit his throat while giving him a clean shave. All right, so we got the tyrant Dionysus. Again, I'll say it again. I think one of the virtues of Latin is slowing it down. If you're doing research or any kind of serious work, you have to slow things down, I believe. At least learn how to slow things down before you can speed up. In other words, work your way through problems and so forth. So the tyrant Dionysus, since conium is a conjunction, it means since. Since he was fearing, literally to commit, but also to give. Since he was fearing to give his head to a barber. Since he was fearing to give, that's committere, his head, the caput, to a barber. Notice that barber in this case is the third declension dative singular, because dative is to someone, so tonsori, so there's the letter I. What did he do next? He taught dokuit, so here's the imperfect form. Again, you may have to look this word up here. It comes from dokio dokere, taught. So just to show you here where this is coming from, this is the perfect form of dokio dokere dokui doctus. That's where we get the word doctor. But it's perfect, so we got to translate it in the past tense. So he taught, and normally you teach someone. So here's our accusative plural, first declension. Suis filios, taught his daughters. And then normally you teach someone to do something. Taught his daughters tondere, to shave or to cut, and then his beard and hair. So taught his daughters to cut his beard and hair. So taught his daughters tondere, to cut his beard and hair. And then we have punctuation, which we want to use. And therefore, the girls were cutting. Therefore, the girls were cutting. And therefore, the girls were cutting the beard and hair of their father. So therefore, we're cutting the beard and hair of their father. So let's put that patris in there. If we were in the regular classroom, we could do this more often. Here we just have to do it verbally, but you can see of their father is third declension genitive singular. So there's is, because genitive means of. So patris, of their father. Matris, of their mother. Fratris, of their brother. Sorris, of their sister, and so forth. Okay, so that one is done. Again, you may have slightly different word order, but this is generally the sense of it. That is it for the Sententia Antiqua, I believe. Now we're going to move on to, we'll just do one of the longer passages. We'll do Cyrus's dying words on immortality. I attended a lecture recently by a professor of classics at ECU, and one of the things I took away from her presentation was, in the Roman world, religion was everywhere. Which isn't to say that the Romans were religious people. That's a little bit different kind of consideration, but the idea of death and immortality, and was just everywhere in the Roman world, apparently. So here we go. This is from Cicero, De Senectute, chapters 22, lines 79 to 81, if you want to take a look at the original. This passage and the next are both drawn from Cicero's treatise De Senectute on old age, composed shortly before Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BC. Cyrus the Great, whom Cicero quotes here, was a Persian king of the 6th century and founder of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. Credo means to believe. And then here you have a question that you may want to consider in case you have to write about this on the exam. So let's go ahead and read it. O mei filiae tres non debitis esse misere, ad mortem enam nunc venio, sed pars mei animus meus semper remanebit. Dum eram vobiscum animum non veribatis, sed ex factis meis intelligebatis eum esse in hoc porre. Credite egetur animum esse undum post mortem, etiam si eum non veribitis, et semper conservate mei in memoriae vestere. As you can see, this longer passage uses a lot of words and cognates that we just had, including, sons, daughters, miserable, death, come, part, always, see, and so forth. So, death. So this should help us translate this longer passage. So first, once again, you're going to need to open up a dictionary or look up words, and you're probably going to have something like this. Oh, my sons, 3, not you ought to be miserable. To death, for now I come, but part of me, mind my, always will remain. While I was with you, mind not you were seeing, but from deeds my you were understanding him to be in this body, or it in this body, it referring back to animum. Believe therefore the mind to be the same after death, even if it not, you will see, and always conserve me in memory your. So it's the idea of the afterlife, and that the soul or the mind, animus, can be tricky to translate. It can be mind, intellect, soul. So choose one. I tend to translate it as mind in classical Latin, soul in Christian Latin. But again, you can come to your own conclusions. All right. Let's go ahead and give ourselves a topic here. So Cyrus's dying words. I had a student a couple of years ago talk about immorality, which is a little bit different than immortality. So if you do write about this, make sure you're writing about immortality and not immorality. There is a difference. Okay, so let's walk through this here. So hopefully you've looked up the words. So, oh, my 3 sons. So we're going to use punctuation to stop. So that one's fairly straightforward. Oh, my. If I can type here. Oh, my 3 sons, you should not be literally miserable, but I'll just say you should not be sad. So let's take a look at the original Latin. You all, so tis, you all should or not be, esse, misere, sad. The Latin actually is fairly complex for us at this point in the sense that here we have a verb in the second person plural, but then we need to recognize that we have an adjective agreeing in number and case with the verb it's modifying. So in this case, it's second declension nominative plural, which is the letter I. But then we also have an infinitive to be. And so the sense of it is fairly straightforward, but the Latin is a little bit more complex perhaps than the sense of it. For, ana means for, F-O-R. For now I'm dying, but literally for now I come to my death. For now I am dying would be a more idiomatic translation, but I try to keep it literal. For now I am coming to my death. For now, nunc, I am coming, venio, to my death. Here's our genitive of the whole, which is one of the grammar topics, but a part of me. So notice I stop after every clause, but a part of me, and then part of me, my, here I'm going to contradict myself and actually say my soul. For some reason, it feels more natural to say that versus mind. But a part of me, my soul, will always remain. Will always remain. But a part of me, my soul, will always remain. Do means while, W-H-I-L-E. So while I was with you, while I was with you. So we can, while, eram, I was, eram, I was, eres, you were, erat, he was, eramos, we were, eratis, you all were, erant, they were. Again, needs to be memorized. While I was with you, you were not seeing, in other words, you did not see, literally, you were not seeing my soul. You were not seeing my soul. Latin is a little bit more precise than English in terms of tenses, so I'm going to say we're not seeing my soul. But you understood my soul from the deeds that are in my body. This one's a little bit trickier. What's the idea here is, well, like most people when they're alive, they look at the things through their physical senses, and we tend to judge people outwardly by what we can measure in terms of external material empirical forms, and that's sort of this, what the sense of it here is. The sons saw his deeds in a physical, material, even measurable sense, but gave little indication that they understood the man or person he was inside, which is often the case, sadly, for most people, until it's too late. But so how do we translate this? So while I was with you, you were not seeing my soul, but from my deeds, you were understanding that it was in my body. So this one, let me go ahead and write something and then we'll try to revise it if I could. So while I was with you, you were not seeing my soul, but said, from my deeds, in other words, from my many accomplishments, you were understanding, so that's the intelligebatis, it to be in this body. So again, this sounds awkward, but I'm going to keep it literal so we can understand the Latin. So but from my deeds, said ex factis meis, you were understanding, intelligebatis, it, referring back to animum, to be, esse, in this body. Notice that corpore is third declension ablative singular. And so generally when we say where, we need the ablative in Latin. Credite is the imperative form. Believe, therefore, the soul to be the same after death. So credite igitur, so believe, therefore, the soul to be the same after death. Believe, therefore, the soul to be the same, oindum, that's new for us, I think, after death, even if, or also if, even if, or also if, and then eum, again referring back to soul, you will not see it. So non vedibitis, that's our future tense, bo bibi bibibu, tis means you all, even if you will not see it. Also if, or even if you will not see it. And at always keep or preserve, always preserve me in your memory. And always preserve or keep me in your memory. And always preserve me in, vestre means your, second person plural, memories. Notice that in memore, vestre are both in the ablative. First declension ablative singular is a. All right, guys, that is it for today's tutorial. So I will send this to you guys, so you'll study this week, and then next week is review, and then your test on chapters 13, 14, and 15 will be the week after next. And so please take this time to learn material. And as always, let me know if you have any questions. Valete omnes.